Hey, welcome back! Today we're looking at Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, one of his most beloved tragedies. And a story that is often called one of the greatest love stories of all time. I'm afraid that I disagree with that assessment. I think that the cumulative knowledge about love that all of the characters have could hardly fill a teaspoon. Juliet's parents certainly fail to show her any love. Romeo's parents really aren't even there. The other guardian figures, like the nurse and the friar, instead of giving very loving guidance, give really bad advice. And Romeo and Juliet, their relationship? Well, let's just say that for the whole first act, Romeo is mooning over a girl named Rosaline, who he thinks he can't live without and who he thinks he'll die if she doesn't love him, and then he immediately turns around and falls in love with a 13-year-old. Juliet is a bit more sincere in her love and affection, but let's remember, she's 13. I mean, if you look back at your diary at 13 and see what you said about love then, you might come to the conclusion that you didn't know that much. All they know about each other by the time they fall madly, madly in love is the fact that the other person is hot and a good kisser. They don't even know each other's names, or literally anything other than the surface of the face. And 3 days later, they die for each other, without having many more conversations. I'm sorry, Romeo drives me nuts. Juliet is sweet, for a kid. There are 3 characters in this play that I actually like and find interesting. In reverse order, Tybalt, who's a firecracker cousin of Juliet's who basically just wants to beat up anybody who's from that stinkin' Montague family. Because he's such a hothead and a fireball, he's an interesting and fun character. Second is Rosaline, who actually doesn't even really show up in the play unless she's dancing in the background. But she's the only character with enough sense to completely reject Romeo, and that definitely says a lot about her character. And finally, hands down the best character in this play is Mercutio. Mercutio is a buddy of Romeo's and Benvolio's, and he's sort of a middleman. He's not technically a Montague, so he can go to Capulet parties, and he's funny, and he likes to make fun of Romeo, which is definitely a plus in this book. And he's got the best speech in the play. Unfortunately, he dies in Act 3, as does Tybalt. And Rosaline gets no lines. So, other than the fun of Tybalt and Mercutio, and Rosaline continuing to reject Romeo, what is it about this play that makes it interesting? I'd say that probably the best part of the play is the poetry. It is probably one of Shakespeare's most heavily poetic works. In fact, the majority of it rhymes, considerably more of it than a lot of his other plays. Some of his plays he will end with a rhyming couplet, but so much of Romeo and Juliet contains those rhymes, instead of just the straight blank verse. Not only that, but it is completely awash with puns. From the lowest characters to the highest characters, they all are constantly playing with their language and words. We open the play with a handful of servants having a fight in the street. And from the moment they walk on the stage, they're constantly punning. A lot of times Shakespeare will use puns with his lower class characters to demonstrate their foolishness and double entendres and the misunderstanding words. But it seems like Samson and Gregory are actually pretty quick and slick with their tongues here. Romeo plays word games all the way up, as does Juliet. And there's that sort of spoken language of love where you mean more even than you say. And so there's a lot of really wonderful passages and lines throughout this play. Not only do we have all of the puns and just the general poetry, but Shakespeare actually works sonnets into his dialogue, which is very cool. The famous prologue is itself a sonnet, as is the conversation back and forth between Romeo and Juliet when they first meet in Act 1, Scene 5. Romeo takes the first quatrain, Juliet takes the second quatrain, and then they alternate lines back and forth in the third quatrain, or the volta. And then they make out. And while this play may not have a whole lot to say about true love, one thing it does talk about is passion, and especially the heat of passion. This happens in a really quick 3 days, and it is all in the middle of summer down in Italy. And from Shakespeare's English perspective, that is a center of heat and passion. Notice the parallels to some extent between the passionate anger of Tybalt and the passionate love of Romeo. It is all rash. We jump into love, we jump into death, we jump into violence, all because we are just too hot and too passionate. The biggest voice of reason in this play is Friar Lawrence, who tries to talk Romeo out of his passions and get him clear-headed and calm. But even Friar Lawrence is a little excited about the idea of finally calming down these two families, and he thinks that maybe this love will do it. Unfortunately, his thought is misguided. So let's get a quick rundown of the plot, and I'll point out some of my favorite bits. Act 1 begins, as we mentioned, with the famous sonnet prologue that recaps the whole story. Here we have two feuding families that are constantly battling with each other, and of those two families, two children descend who fall in love and conflate the conflict as well as ultimately end it. Spoilers, but it's all in the prologue. Scene 1 starts with some servants from the Capulets bumping into some servants from the Montagues and deciding to fight. Benvolio rushes out and says, "Hey guys, let's not fight," and he draws his sword to help part them. But Tybalt of the Capulet family comes out, sees Benvolio with sword drawn, and Tybalt's always ready for a fight. So he and Benvolio fight. More and more people run to join the fray, including Old Capulet and Old Montague, in spite of the fact that Old Capulet's like a geezer. And the Prince Aeschylus comes out and shouts at them all and says, "You all have disturbed the peace too many times. You're all in trouble now. If anybody starts another fight, you're dead. Dead, you hear me?" Lady Montague gets the story from Benvolio and says, "Oh, where's Romeo? I hope he wasn't involved in any of this. My sweet son." And Benvolio says, "Nah, he wasn't involved. He's over there crying in the field out there." "Oh, Rosaline, why don't you love me?" And Benvolio bumps into Romeo and is like, "Hey, why you so mopey, Romeo?" And Romeo's like, "But Rosaline doesn't love me, and I'll love her forever." Meanwhile, the Capulets are throwing a party, and Capulet has just gotten a hint from Paris that Paris wants to marry his 13-year-old daughter, Juliet. He sends a messenger out to deliver invitations to people, but the messenger can't read, and so he bumps into Romeo in the street and is like, "Hey, can you read this list for me?" Kind of jokes around for a while and then says, "Sure." And he reads the list and realizes this is a party of the Capulets. And Benvolio's like, "Hey, let's party crash, and I can show you a whole lot of hot girls, and it will completely drive Rosalind out of your mind." And Romeo goes, "Nothing will drive Rosalind out of my mind. I'll go along, no such sight to be shown, but to rejoice in splendor of mine own." Because Rosalind's going to be at the party. Meanwhile, Lady Capulet is trying to hint really hard that Juliet needs to hook up with Paris, because Paris wants to marry her. And Juliet's like, "I've not thought about marriage yet." Meanwhile, she has this really obnoxious nurse who keeps making the same sort of bawdy jokes over and over again, and talking about embarrassing things about when she used to nurse Juliet. And Juliet agrees to go ahead and give Paris a shot at the party. "I'll look to like, if looking liking move, but no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly." She agrees to honor her mother's request. They go to the party. Romeo, Benvolio start crashing the party along with Mercutio, who is actually invited. And Romeo's still being sad and mopey and forlorn, and Mercutio is making fun of him. Romeo's talking about his dreams and his foreshadowing of what's going to happen. And Mercutio starts telling this absolutely magical speech about Queen Mab, the magical fairy queen who messes with our heads. Just like she's messed with your head, Romeo. "Oh then, I see Queen Mab hath been with you. She is the fairy's midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone, on the forefinger of an alderman, drawn with a team of little atomi over men's noses as they lie asleep. Her wagon spokes are made of long spinner's legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers. Her traces are the smallest spiderweb, her collars of the moonshine's watery beams, her whip the cricket's bone, the lash of film, her wagoner a small gray-coated gnat, not half so big as a round little worm pricked from the lazy finger of a maid. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut made by the joiner, squirrel, or old grub, time out of mind the fairies' coachmakers. And in this state she gallops night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love on courtiers' knees that dream of curtsies straight on lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees, or ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream, which oft the angry Mab with blisters plagues, because their breaths with sweetmeats tainted are. Sometimes she gallops o'er the courtier's nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit. And sometime comes she with the tithe pig's tail, tickling the parson's nose as he lies asleep. Then he dreams of another benefice. Sometimes she driveth o'er the soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breaches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of healths 5 fathoms deep. And then anon drums in his ear, at which he starts and wakes, and being thus frighted, swears a prayer or two and sleeps again. They arrive at the party and are recognized by Tybalt, who is so ticked he just wants to skewer Romeo right there. But Capulet grabs him by the ear and says, no, you're not going to mess up my party. Romeo is a fine young man. Everybody talks good about him. I know he's the enemy, but you leave him alone. And Capulet, in fact, he's like saying nice words to the guests while he's got Tybalt right there and setting him straight. In spite of the fact that Capulet's a pretty old man and he keeps talking about how his feet are too sore to dance anymore. Meanwhile, Romeo catches a glimpse of Juliet and Rosaline is gone from his brain. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. Did my heart love till now? Forswear its sight, for I ne'er saw true beauty till this night. Makes you wonder what would happen if we went on for a few more acts. If Romeo hadn't died, would he have seen someone else like 3 days later? Anyway, he brushes her hand and then is like all apologetic about touching her hand with his rough hand, and then he starts making out with her. At the end of the party, he asks who she is and realizes she's a Capulet. Meanwhile, Juliet is asking her nurse who that young man is and realizes he's a Montague. We're enemies. Juliet says, my only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late. Oh, too bad. Act 2. Again, we get a chorus coming in and saying a sonnet to introduce the second act. Romeo has run off alone, and Benvolio and Mercutio are wandering around like, where's that loser Romeo? Is he still crying about Rosalind? Come on, Romeo, come on out. Mercutio says, nay, I'll conjure to Romeo, humors, madman, passion, lover. Appear thou with the likeness of a sigh, speak but one rhyme and I am satisfied. Cry out, ah me, pronounce but love and dove. Finally, Mercutio and Benvolio are like, fine, if he's gonna be a sulky jerk and run off without us, whatever, we'll leave him, and they leave. Meanwhile, Romeo has jumped into a garden to hide from them, and he discovers that it's Juliet's backyard. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. It's like watching the sunrise, watching her stick her head out the window. It is my lady, oh, it is my love. He sees that she's sighing and crying a little bit and looking out the window, and he decides to snoop. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name. Or if thou wilt not be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. She's talking about their names and saying, if only you weren't a Montague, why don't you just throw away your name? 'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is not hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face. Oh, be some other name belonging to a man. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for thy name, which is no part of thee, take all myself. If only you weren't called Romeo Montague, you could have me. And Romeo's like, yes, okay. And he rushes up and says, I take thee at thy word, call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth I never will be Romeo. Juliet is surprised to see a man in her backyard listening to her. And she's like, whoa, who are you? And he says, by a name I know not how to tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself, because it is an enemy to thee. Had I it written, I would tear the word. I'm not Romeo anymore, so you call me whatever you want to. And Juliet's all nervous because a Montague is like in her yard, like climbing up to her bedroom now. And she wants him to be safe, as well as, this is awkward. She knows also that he's heard everything that she's just said, and she blushes a little bit, but she says, dost thou love me? I know thou wilt say aye, and I will take thy word. Yet, if thou swearest, thou mayst prove false. At lovers' perjuries, they say, Jove laughs. O gentle Romeo, if thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully. Or if thou thinkest I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay, and so will woo, but else not for the world. In truth, fair Montague, I am too fond, and therefore thou mayst think my behavior light. But trust me, gentlemen, I'll prove more true than those that have more coin to be strange. I should have been more strange, I must confess, but that thou overheardst ere I was ware my true love passion. Therefore pardon me, and not impute this yielding to light love, which the dark night hath so discovered. Since he's already overheard her completely confess to the knight that she loves him, there's nothing she can really do about it. It's not like she can play coy anymore. So please don't think me forward, but I'm madly in love with you. She's so sweet and so excited, and she doesn't know how to love yet. She's 13. And Romeo starts swearing at the moon, and she's like, no, don't swear at the moon changes all the time. And so since she won't let him swear, she just says goodnight, and he says, well, won't you let me be satisfied? And she says, what will satisfy you? You know, swearing our love to each other. You know, we want to pledge our love forever and ever and ever, since we've known each other 2 hours, most of which was just staring across the room. Juliet feels that love is eternal for him, and she says, my love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. But at that point, the nurse starts calling for her in her room, and she's like, oh, hang on, don't get caught. Just a sec. And Juliet rushes back out and says, 3 words, dear Romeo, and good night indeed. If thy bent be of love be honorable, thy purpose marriage, send me word tomorrow. by one that I'll procure to come to thee, where and what time thou wilt perform the rite, and all my fortune at thy foot I'll lay, and follow thee, my lord, throughout the world. So if you really love me and you want to marry me, tomorrow we will make arrangements. Meanwhile, the nurse keeps calling Juliet. She's like, hang on, I'm coming, hang on. I gotta tell my boyfriend how much I love him first. And they finish their arrangements, and Juliet just almost can't let go of him, and she says, oh, parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow. I'll just keep saying good night, and so that this never ends. Good night, good night, good night, good night, good night, good night. Scene 3, Romeo goes to talk to the Friar Lawrence and tell him everything that's happened. He's in love with Juliet. Not Rosaline, no, not Rosaline. It's Juliet now. God pardon sin, wast thou with Rosaline? With Rosaline, my ghostly father? No, I forgot that name, and that name's Woe. Ha, I don't care about her anymore. I'm in love with Juliet now. Holy St. Francis, what a change is here. Is Rosaline that thou didst love so dear, so soon forsaken? Young men's love then lie not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes. That's so true! Can we just, actually embrace that line, that this is the most accurate line in the play? But yet he changes his mind and says, oh, she knew well thy love did read by rote that could not spell. But come, young waverer, come, go with me. In one respect I'll thy assistant be, for this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. So maybe this will straighten out your arguments. Mercutio and Benvolio jibe Romeo a bit for all of the events of last night, for running out on them. But Romeo's like, no, it's fine, I'm happy, you can't bother me. In comes the nurse, and Mercutio really makes fun of her and jokes around with her. Romeo makes the arrangements that he's going to meet Juliet in Friar Lawrence's cell. And there they will get married. Juliet, meanwhile, is waiting for the return news, and she's super nervous, because she's, of course, never done this before, never been in love before, and all of a sudden, everything hinges on the nurse, who's not the most reliable of characters, taking a good message. The nurse comes in and stalls really, really hard, telling her the message. I am a-weary, give me leave a while, fie, how my bones ache, oh, what a jaunt have I. Juliet says, I would thou hadst my bones, and I thy news, nay, come, I pray thee speak, good nurse, speak. And Juliet tries to sweet-talk the nurse into finally telling her the news, and finally, the nurse says, well, you've got a husband, just run down there and get married. And Juliet dashes off to get married. Meanwhile, back at Friar Lawrence's cell, he's ready with Romeo, and they're all excited. In comes Juliet. It's time for the wedding. And Friar Lawrence marries them at the end of Act 2. It feels like we've come to the end of a comedy by the end of Act 2. Most of our comedies end in marriage, and here we lie, right in the center of the play. Unfortunately for Romeo and Juliet, this is a tragedy, and Romeo's about to make a big mistake in Act 3.